Good afternoon. I'm Cheng Li, Director of the John L. Thornton China Center here at Brookings. I want to thank you all for joining us for this very special day-long conference in advance of President Obama's trip to Asia. This morning, we heard from one of the architects of the Obama administration's rebalance to Asia. And this afternoon, we now have the opportunity to hear one of the top practitioners tasked with sustaining it, Caroline Atkinson. I was just in Beijing last week, where I was excited to see in the official media many pictures of you meeting with Chinese leaders like Vice Premier Wang Yang and some other very senior Chinese officials. She clearly made a great impression because I later observed the Chinese government busily planting flowers and cleaning the streets and cutting pollutions in preparation for her visit this coming week. Now, all joking aside, Caroline served as the Deputy Assistant to President and the Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economics. Since joining the Obama administration in 2011, Caroline has played a central role in the administration's response to the European financial crisis and led the US government work with the G8 and G20. In her current role, she served as the president's personal representative to major international economic summits. She also coordinates the policy-making process in the realm of global finance, trade and investment, development, energy, and environment, all of which will be featured topics at the APEC. I particularly want to thank Caroline for her extensive work in China over the past few years and advancing US economic interests in China. It's really a tough job, but she did remarkably well. Now, I understand that Caroline will have quite a busy month, first with APEC, followed by G20 Summit in Australia. So we are especially honored that she could join us in the midst of her very busy schedule to deliver this very timely and important speech. And please join me in welcoming Caroline Atkinson.
Thank you very much, Chang, for that introduction. And I'm looking forward to seeing the flowers and breathing the air next week. And I'm going to be with somebody else who may well think that they're all for him. It's a great pleasure to be here at Brookings and to see many former colleagues and friends here. Strobe, of course, is an important feature here. Bill, Ken, others, and Chang have built this center, the John Thornton China Center, into a global leader for strategic thinking on US-China relations. And we in the administration are indeed grateful for your thoughtful and innovative ideas, and indeed for putting on such an important conference today. I know you've dealt with a number of topics already today, including with one of my colleagues discussing energy and climate on a panel. As you know, the president is going, this trip that's coming up next week is his second one to Asia this year. He starts in China for the APEC leaders meeting and then for an important bilateral state visit with President Xi. He then will go on to Burma for the East Asia Summit and the US-ASEAN leaders meeting, and then finally to Brisbane, Australia for the G20 leaders summit. I'm going to focus today mostly on China and on the president's economic objectives for his meeting with President Xi, or a number of meetings with the Chinese leadership. But before turning to that, I just want to note that some of the important economic themes that he will discuss there, but also in other stops, will sound throughout the trip, and themes that in many cases build on initiatives where there has been important US leadership. Now, the president heads to Asia at a time of increasing strength and, I think, confidence in the US economy. But at the same time, there are renewed concerns about the impact on the strength and durability of the global economic recovery from less good developments elsewhere. While the United States grew at a robust rate in the third quarter, there are signs of slowing momentum in some parts of the emerging world, and most importantly, even a renewed risk of stagnation in the euro area and in Japan. And one of the president's core messages throughout this trip will be the clear need for action to strengthen global demand and prevent an economic slowdown and really reinforce the economic recovery to provide jobs and better living standards. And this is particularly important for countries that possess ample fiscal space and the surplus economies. Now, I am glad to say that the importance of strengthening global growth to provide high-quality jobs, a theme that the United States has fought over a number of years to put at the center of the agenda, is now there in the G20 discussions. Another key issue there will be finalizing agreement and moving to implement the financial regulatory reforms that G20 countries have agreed on now to protect taxpayers and limit risks of a future financial crisis. This is another area where the United States acted early, acted decisively, and where I think our experience has shown that that is indeed the best way to lead to a revival in the ability of the financial sector to do what it's supposed to do, which is to provide credit to support investment and to support growth in the economy. At APEC, opening markets and deepening economic ties within this dynamic Asia-Pacific region is at the core of the agenda and has been for a number of years. As you know, we will continue to insist that this be done on the basis of strong rules and high standards to create a level playing field for American companies and workers and those of other countries that reflect our values and our standards on labor, environment, and other key issues in today's economy. Infrastructure investment is, of course, a major concern here in America, but it's also one in many countries of Asia. There are other important issues that the President expects to speak about and to discuss whilst in Asia in all of these stops, including, importantly, global challenges. One of the most urgent and immediate that he has been dealing with and calling many leaders around the world on is the Ebola outbreak. Another key issue, of course, in a very different timescale, is climate change. This is something that is increasingly at the forefront of the international agenda. And then there will be other issues, such as boosting the potential of economies to grow by supporting the role of women in the workforce. Now, talking of global challenges that major economies need to work on together brings me to China. And we are increasingly seeking to find ways to work together as the two largest countries and two largest economies in the world to address global issues whose resolution is in our common interests. At the same time, we're working to deepen our bilateral economic ties of trade and investment, provided again that this is done, or this must be done in a way that safeguards the interests of American workers and firms and farmers, and in a fair and transparent and rules-based system. And I should add that we do believe that this fair, transparent, and rules-based system is one that is in fact in the interests of everybody because it's the surest way to promote strong growth, high-quality jobs, and better living standards. It's not a zero-sum game, it's a positive-sum game. We would like to see policies that lead to a further substantial expansion of American exports into China on the bilateral agenda as part of their economic rebalancing and as part of their opening up. And a China that is more open, more transparent, and more welcoming to foreign investors is also something that we believe to be importantly in the interests of the United States and in the interests of China. Now, we, of course, have a very rich and deep bilateral economic relationship with China at all levels of the government and throughout many agencies. I don't need to tell you about the strategic and economic dialogue led by Secretaries Kerry and Liu, the JCCT with Secretary Pritzker and Ambassador Froman, and then many other streams of work that go to make up these discussions. From the White House, in preparation for this trip and to make progress on many of the issues that we want to work together with China on, Ambassador Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, was in Beijing, I guess it's about 2 months ago now, at the beginning of September. And as Cheng mentioned, I am just back from there, where I was discussing the President's economic agenda. And as Cheng alluded, I was both Ambassador Rice in her contacts and me and mine, and others in the administration have been very impressed by the clear desire of the Chinese officials to work closely with us to make sure that we build on the historic Sunnylands meeting between Presidents Obama and Xi to deepen further the US and China bilateral relationship, both as it regards common global challenges and as it regards bilateral issues. We know that for China, this is a very important meeting as well, and we have been very gratified by the warm welcome that we received there. We know also that Chinese officials are managing a complex set of issues and challenges domestically as they make progress on the third plenum reforms that, as you know, promised a decisive role for the market, at the same time as President Xi advances his important agenda on anti-corruption. I want to just take a couple of minutes to lay out how President Obama views the US-China economic relationship and to describe our strategy. First, and most importantly, President Obama starts from the premise that a stable and prosperous China is in the interests of the United States. We have no doubts about that. China can provide a big market for American exports, and it can be a source of strength and stability in the global economy, as we saw after the global financial crisis. But the president also recognizes that there are challenges from China's rapid ascent. Some of those challenges are being felt increasingly in China itself, and even lead to some change in how the leadership perceives its own interests and the interests of China. For example, air pollution and environmental concerns have meant that climate change is now an important area for potential collaboration. Other issues present more acute challenges for American workers and farmers and companies and can cause bilateral frictions that we work to address, as I said, in this more or less constant exchange of discussions and visits between officials. And on a global level, I believe that the world is looking increasingly to China to abide by the international rules of the road that have, after all, supported its stunning and impressive growth over the last 35 years in the context of an increasingly integrated and open global economy. The president is looking forward to a strategic and open discussion with President Xi of how best these two can work together and our two countries can work together to grasp the opportunities and to address the challenges in the interests of the people of both countries. I'll just point to some of the data that we believe is important context. The steady entry of hundreds of millions of Chinese into the global labor market has substantially expanded the world's potential output and yielded benefits for US consumers in the form of additional goods and lower inflation. As I mentioned, China's market is increasingly important for US exporters, and US goods exports to China expanded by over 70% in the last 5 years, making China our fastest growing export market. The President would like to see that figure rise rapidly over coming years as China moves towards a more consumption-based growth model and continues to be an important source of demand for US goods and perhaps increasingly services. China is also investing in the United States at unprecedented rates, and this supports American jobs here. The stock of Chinese investment, Chinese direct investment in the United States has risen by some 6-fold in the last 5 years. And during I'm just going to dwell for a little bit on Chinese investment in the United States, because this is something that we've looked at very carefully. It's quite difficult actually to find the best data to measure this. But we see increasingly that Chinese companies are moving in, as other foreign companies do here, and then establishing factories and plants and other elements here that, of course, provide work for Americans. During the global financial crisis, just looking at the world more generally, China joined with the United States and other G20 countries. This was really when the G20 leaders group got started, to mobilize a worldwide response to the collapse in the world economy. And China introduced a big package of measures that maintained the growth of domestic demand and reduced their current account surplus and helped deficit countries to adjust. In large part due to our efforts to bring China into international economic institutions such as the G20, and I'll just, as an aside, mention that I was in the United States Treasury with Secretaries Rubin and Summers in the last Clinton administration at the time when the precursor to the G20, the G22, got started. And that was when there was the crisis in Asia, not in China, but in other parts of Asia, that really led us to understand that it was important to have a broader set of countries around the table. We needed to discuss these economic matters with the big economies that themselves mattered. And this led directly to the G20, which of course was so important in stabilizing the global economy after the global financial crisis. Now, turning to the United States economy, our performance and our ability to deliver the kind of high-quality jobs and better living that we want to do for the American people is really overwhelming the result of the policies and institutions here at home. But we know that recent academic work has shown that the rapid growth of China's manufacturing exports has led, of course, to increased competition and required adjustment in its trading partners, including the United States. That is in part just due to the sheer size of China and the speed of its entry into the global economy. And that's part that we will need to adjust to. But it's also the result of certain Chinese policies and practices that we hope will change and we press for change in over time. China poses some challenges to the existing rules of global trade and finance, and challenges that were not envisaged when those rules were first designed. Just to name a few, China's exchange rate continues by most measures to be undervalued. Since President Obama took office, China and we have made significant progress in moving towards a more market-determined exchange rate, but more is still needed. We believe that that is in the interests of China as well as in the interests of the rest of the global economy. We know that China has aspirations to become an innovative economy. That also would be in the interests of China and the rest of the world. I don't believe you can have too much innovation, but China's approach in the near term, which has been mostly to identify domestic champions, focus on transferring foreign intellectual property, sometimes illicitly acquired, runs counter to the kind of environment that you need that will really foster innovation. I have a new colleague in the White House who's the chief technology officer, who comes from Silicon Valley, is full of ideas and energy, and she is always talking about the importance of openness to foster innovation. And that is something that we believe is really important if you want that kind of innovation to flourish. The cyber-enabled theft of trade secrets and confidential business information for commercial gain is an especially serious concern. This has been one that your speaker this morning, Tom Donilon, brought to people's attention, and it does adversely affect the fundamentals of the United States-China relationship. In key sectors, China continues to promote its state-owned enterprises and other national champions at the expense not only of foreign firms, but also at the expense of less well-connected Chinese private business. As a result, United States and other private businesses are forced to compete on unfair terms, not only in China, but in third markets. And while China recognizes that it will need to reform this system over time, we will continue to press for a change to level the playing field right now. And this applies, by the way, to another area where where we're working with China to promote its entry into the global system of rules, and that's on the financing of exports. We used to be in a competition with all sorts of countries to finance exports more cheaply, and then a kind of rules-based system developed out of the OECD as everybody agreed to some basic rules that saved everybody money and promoted decisions that were based more on what was appropriate than on what kind of financing could be obtained. And that is the system that it's important for China to come into. Agricultural trade is another area of enormous potential for mutually beneficial cooperation, but where Chinese actions so far have been tending to distort global markets, and if not changed, could even ultimately pose a threat to global food security. China has not approved biotechnology products in a timely manner based on sound science, has not allowed these sorts of seeds to be imported. And this has led to long delays in the planting of new seed varieties. More importantly, this kind of behavior stifles innovation. And this is innovation in a sector that will be critical to feeding a growing planet. Resolving this issue will help American farmers, but it will have far wider significance in addressing global food security, which is an area, of course, where China has an enormous interest. And finally, China's industrial development has made it, of course, the world's largest emitter of carbon. We used to have that dubious honor, and contributes to the country's pollution and, of course, to the global climate problem. Finally, with China's population aging rapidly and its labor force beginning to fall and Chinese wages now rising, US competition with China will shift increasingly to higher value-added products. And it is critical that we also work in these technology areas to make sure that we have an appropriate level playing field which allows for strong and vigorous competition and for consumers to get the most benefit. I want to discuss briefly the third Plenum reforms which President Xi introduced last year, which I mentioned earlier. These were, of course, ambitious and far-reaching and very positive. Now, it's perhaps unsurprising that, and many of you here would know this better than I, that the Chinese government faces important resistance to these reforms from vested interests in the party and the government, and especially from state-owned enterprises. But if they are implemented, if this resistance is steadily and firmly overcome, these third plenum reforms, we believe, could address a number of the challenges and frictions in our economic relationship to the benefit of both countries. Reducing the role of the state in the economy, for example, could improve the operating environment for foreign companies as well as domestic private companies. I mentioned innovation in biotech and innovation more generally. As China seeks to become an innovator, it will be important and increasingly obviously in its own interest to strengthen intellectual property rights protection. And this strengthening, even if maybe initially designed to promote innovation in China, will have important spillover effects and benefits for foreign companies. Reform of Chinese state-owned enterprises will also help to promote a level playing field that will allow for a better bilateral relationship and make China a stronger force for global growth. Financial and currency reform, which is also on the agenda, would also promote the rebalancing of China's economy towards consumption, helping to make China's future growth sustainable and holding the potential for a big increase in our exports to them. Now, even as it reforms, it's possible that China could do that in a way that discriminates against foreign firms and favors domestic firms, even if not state-owned. But such a strategy of discrimination against foreign firms, we do not believe serves China's own economic interests in the long term. And in fact, there are already some signs that the inflow of foreign direct investment into China may be slowing as foreign companies face a more difficult operating environment, particularly this year. We have followed with growing concern the way that China is enforcing its anti-monopoly law. Now, every country has the legitimate right to protect its consumers from business conduct that harms competition. China has committed to the principle that the objective of competition policy is to promote consumer welfare and economic efficiency, and not individual competitors or industries. And it has also committed that the enforcement of competition law should be fair, objective, transparent, and non-discriminatory. And the Obama administration is holding China to these commitments. Let me turn now to a bit more on our strategy towards our economic ties with China. We believe that these deep economic ties can be and should be a stabilizing influence on our overall relationship. And I believe President Xi said that himself. We each have an enormous stake in each other's economic success. But that does mean addressing critical issues ranging from currency to intellectual property rights to opening market access on a transparent basis to China becoming a full participant in the economic and trade rules-based system. So, right from the beginning, the Obama administration has had, if you like, a four-part strategy in its relationship with approach towards China on the economic field. First, we engage with China bilaterally and multilaterally to encourage economic reforms that we believe will promote a shift domestically to sustainable economic growth, which is in turn a critical factor to promoting strong and sustainable and balanced growth in the global economy. That includes reorienting China's economy away from a development model that relies too heavily on exports and on credit-fueled investment in real estate and infrastructure to one that increases consumer spending and contributes to global demand. Central to this goal, as I mentioned earlier, is China moving increasingly towards a market-determined exchange rate. I don't think any of us really knows what is a right exchange rate, and that's one reason why we encourage countries and have agreed with many countries to focus domestic policies on domestic goals and then let the exchange rate be determined by the market. We have also sought to address sources of friction in our economic relationship with China by pressing China to address discriminatory policies and practices that may harm US companies and workers and that undermine the returns to innovation. And we have engaged China at the highest levels in our annual SNED and JCCT. We've made significant progress in areas of concern. Where engagement has not succeeded, we've pursued a robust enforcement strategy to defend American workers and companies and enforce US laws. And we have, of course, brought a series of important cases to the World Trade Organization, the WTO. I want to mention a bit about the Bilateral Investment Treaty, the BIT, which has been a topic of a lot of discussion. Now, we are committed to negotiating an ambitious, high-standard bilateral investment treaty with China, with just narrow, limited, and transparent exceptions. And when I was in Beijing, I emphasized just how narrow can be in terms of the United States BITs with other countries. China has shown a strong interest in these negotiations, in part, I believe, understanding that a strong BIT with the United States could help to support and drive fundamental economic reforms and could help to transform the way that China treats foreign investment that it needs to sustain its future growth and productivity growth. A key breakthrough was achieved last year with China's agreement to focus on a negative list and pre-establishment. As you know, the Chinese government intends to propose its negative list early next year. This will be an important signal of the seriousness about opening up the economy and following through on reform measures. And it's difficult. I don't want to underestimate how difficult it may be domestically in China to winnow down all of the demands that there will naturally be from today's closed sectors. But at the same time, we in the United States need to have political support for a BIT with China, and that will only come if it is really a high quality and ambitious BIT. Third, we're seeking to continue to work with China internationally and to give it a greater voice in the current economic architecture of rules, norms, institutions that have governed the global economy since the end of World War II, and which, as I mentioned earlier, have benefited China's economy as China industrialized and lifted millions and millions of Chinese citizens out of poverty. We elevated the G20 to be the premier forum for international cooperation, to provide a seat for China at the table of international policy considerations. At the same time, with that seat at the table comes responsibilities. To anchor, now we understand well that to anchor China in global economic governance and to make sure that this is a fair exchange for China, we in the United States need to follow through on our commitment to modernize the governance of the IMF. The President considers the approval of the IMF quota and governance reform to be an immediate and vital national security and economic policy priority. The rest of the world has acted, and United States action is the last remaining hurdle to the implementation of these reforms, and we well understand that that is important in order to demonstrate to emerging economies that they can have an appropriate voice and role in the international system that we help to design to uphold the rules and values that we have. Fourth, we've worked in multilateral and plurilateral settings, as you will all be aware, to establish in the trade sphere new 21st century standards that will include strong disciplines in areas such as intellectual property rights and state-owned enterprises. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, will set open and fair standards for trade in the world's most dynamic economic region that covers 40% of global trade now. It can be the core of a far broader effort to define the rules of the road and integrate the economies across the Asia-Pacific, and it grew out of APEC. We believe that TPP's high standards will set the model for 21st century trade and will help to drive reforms in the 12 countries that will be members that are now negotiating, and others alike. Now, we know that China has a strong economic interest in freer world trade. In recent years, it seems to have run into some trouble in dealing with protectionist interests at home, and that make it difficult for it to reduce tariffs, or for government officials to agree to reduce tariffs and open up to foreign competition, even in areas where China's domestic industry is strong on the global stage. A case in point is the current negotiations over the Information Technology Agreement, or ITA. This pact would eliminate tariffs on everything from MRI machines to semiconductors. Now, as the world's dominant producer of many IT goods, China would be among the top beneficiaries of ITA expansion. But we're still waiting, and some of my colleagues are on airplanes right now flying to Beijing to further discussions. We're still waiting for China to come with a balanced package that will make the deal work, and a balanced package that shows that in the interests of the overall economy, Chinese officials are able to withstand the pressures from some vested interests. So let me just conclude. The president's upcoming trip is obviously an important, critical time to advance this agenda, to advance the agenda that I laid out at the beginning about ultimately driving for stronger growth and better jobs in the United States and around the world, and a stronger, more stable global system that also addresses challenges that are more real today because of the global economy, whether they are challenges such as infectious diseases that can move across the globe more quickly, or challenges that are that no one country can tackle alone, such as climate change. The president intends to have a strategic conversation with President Xi about how China and the United States, the two largest economies in the world, can help to set the course for the development of a free and open and rules-based competitive economy. And he will, of course, raise a number of concerns in the specific areas that I've mentioned, from IPR to biotech to the AML. But above all, his goal in Beijing and the bilateral discussions there on the economic side, is to deepen and discuss together how best to deepen our trade and investment ties with China over the coming years, so as to expand opportunities for American companies, create high-quality American jobs, and, we believe, support the strong growth of the Chinese economy. Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for sharing the really very uplifting agenda for President's trip to China. And you lay out very clearly that job, market access, maybe infrastructure development can benefit the American economy and our consumers, certainly labor. You're also absolutely right that when you mentioned the third Plenum, if really implemented, because it's heavily emphasized on service sector, and especially like education, public health, entertainment, logistics, and the green consumption, these U.S. companies certainly have leverage. You also lay out some concerns. I don't want to repeat. So it's really, you cover so many things. But my question is that, as you said, that the U.S.-China economic relation should be positive sum game. It should be win-win. So in your view, what kind of headline from Chinese leaders' perspective they want to see after that President's summit? Because you talk to Chinese leaders, Liu He and Wang Yang and many other major policy makers. And so in your observation, what they want to get as a top headline news after that visit?
Well, I don't want to be presumptuous about what Chinese leaders want to get. I can tell you what I think American leaders want, which I also believe will be in the interests of both countries, and that is that we have found agreement on some positive areas for collaboration, that we have aired our differences openly and candidly, and thought about how we can address those, and that we are collaborating, importantly, for a strong and stable and growing and cleaner economy, or global economy, or world.
Well,
maybe that's too grand, but...
that's fine. Let me move to another question that you probably noticed. Foreign Minister Wang Yi, about a week ago, laid out the major agenda for APEC. Mm-hmm. Basically 3 areas. Start with the economic integration. Second is economic growth, innovation, and reform. Third is what Chinese call the connectivity and the infrastructure development. Now, in light of all these kind of objectives, China certainly wants to accelerate the plan to establish so-called Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which U.S., as I understand, think it's undermine the current, this kind of ADB or World Bank. But the situation is that China seems to determine to move that direction. So in your view, how to deal with this phenomenon that, as we know, that ADB and the World Bank heavily emphasize poverty relief, but the Chinese approach sounds like they want to emphasize infrastructure development, and maybe resonated very well for the region. So what's your position, and how this will be part of a negotiation, and how to deal with this? China may want to establish its own, and in addition to BRICS banks and etc., this kind of phenomenon, whether this should be part of a negotiation, or should ask that China should stop that practice, or continue to reform the current international institution. So what's the strategy in that regard?
Well, first of all, China has developed an MOU and announced the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So I think that's sort of not something that will be discussed all over again in APEC. What I will say about the United States is that we have a great interest, as I mentioned, in infrastructure investment in the United States, but also how to develop the financing for this and the best way to do it internationally. It's actually an issue that has come up in the G20 over a number of years, and we're hopeful that this year we will be able to make some real progress there on an infrastructure initiative that Australia's been pressing for as well. And one of the interesting things is that people will always say there are big infrastructure needs, but there is a big amount of capital. Somehow the two don't get together. And part of that is about improving the investment environment in the countries where there are infrastructure needs so that private sector investment goes there. Part of it is it just can be simple things like having good project preparation, having standardized legal documents, sharing experience about public-private financing arrangements, and developing financing tools that can link together these pools of capital with the opportunities and share out the risks in a way that make it possible to bring the two together. We're very interested in all of that work. And we're also, you may be aware that the World Bank has started the Global Infrastructure Facility, which is aiming to look at some of this work. We, of course, have a big investment in the existing multilateral institutions, whether it's the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and we believe that there is scope for more creative use of their balance sheets, to expand their ability to finance investment, to work on some of these issues of the investment environment, to attract private capital. And we do believe that these institutions have, a representative global governance structure. They've built up expertise and safeguards over a number of years, and we intend to work vigorously, including with China, in those institutions.
Okay, it's great. Now, I just want to have more audience questions for Mr. Chen. Yeah, the gentleman.
Chen Weihua, China Daily. Yeah, I mean, you give just a very long list of demands for the Chinese. So it seems to me that it takes probably, if not decades, many years. And Chinese would ask, I mean, how Obama could accomplish anything of that scale or profound significance on the society. I mean, given waking up this morning to see the US map more looking like a Chinese red flag. I mean, so my question is, continue what Li Chen just said. Chinese, some at least, are quite disappointed to see U.S. seems to already have a verdict for this APEC bank, BRIC Bank and Asia Infrastructure Bank, before it's actually taking form. So like very pessimistic. So why is that? And also the Chinese Deputy Finance Minister Zhu Guangyao lately said, the TPP is incomplete with Chinese participation. So would the U.S. or Obama during next week say something more positive about, say, Chinese potential participation of TPP, or say the free trade agreement of Asia-Pacific Chinese been proposing? U.S. Obviously is kind of stalking that, and also U.S. is pressing pressure on Australia, South Korea for the infrastructure bank, not participating in that bank. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was obviously a very long list from you as well. And first of all, I'd like to say that I don't really see the things that I ran through as being a list of demands. We're not in a relationship of demands. We're in a relationship, as Cheng said, where we are seeking to find how we can work together in the interests of both parties. Many of the reforms that I was describing are ones that China and President Xi laid out in the third plenum last year. So these are things that China has identified as being in its own interests, and which we welcome because we think that, as I said right at the beginning, our starting point is that a strong and stable and prosperous China is in our interests. It's clearly in China's interests, but we also believe it's in the United States' interests and the interests of the world. Maybe going to a couple of your specific points, we believe that, as I mentioned, there is an important need for increased infrastructure. Sorry, I may have turned away from my mic. For increased infrastructure investment infrastructure investment is a complicated matter because you need to make sure that the projects are well designed and well executed and so on, and as well that they're financed. This is something that we want to work globally to support in many different ways. On TPP, right now we're focusing on finalizing agreement or reaching agreement. Finalizing is perhaps a little bit too ambitious, but moving towards agreement with the existing 12 partners, 11 other countries in the United States. I believe that my colleagues, Ambassador Susan Rice said earlier this year, and my colleague Mike Froman has said that over time, we envisage the TPP and other, the TTIP, for example, which we're negotiating with Europe, with the EU, to be the sort of open-ended agreements that can welcome other countries as they meet the high standards that will be part of those agreements. And perhaps finally, I can just say something about the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, FTAP. Now, this, of course, is something that began, it's possible even that the United States proposed it back in 2006. And it is a long-term strategic vision, as I mentioned, that the entire region should be able to reduce tariffs, not just on particular ranges of goods or for particular countries, but more broadly, because this, we believe, helps to support development across the region. Sure. And that is certainly a longer-term goal that we'll get towards. And in APEC this year, I believe there have been some important developments towards reducing the costs of trade, which has been a very important development of APEC over the years. APEC began the environmental goods tariff reductions, which China is also now a part of those negotiations. So I think there are many ways in which we're working together with China, and I would frame it much more that way than the way that you did.
Well, midterm election aside, the president does have good news, which is the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about that?
Well, certainly, as you know, the U.S. economy, and this is actually something that I notice having gone over a number of years to G20 meetings, and certainly a few years ago, we might have had a sequester or budget shutdown or fiscal cliff, all of these problems that I would try to reassure my colleagues would be addressed. And now, really, there aren't really complaints about the way the U.S. economy is working in the global system. I think people understand that the measures that we have in place domestically, which have been supporting this return to growth and a steady, sustainable private sector growth, so that our economy, our economic output is now significantly above the previous peak, whereas in Europe it's still below. That this is actually in the interests of the global economy. We have unemployment now down below 6%. We, as I mentioned, have a strong third quarter. There are other, we would like the economy to be growing even more strongly. We would like there to be more jobs, and we would like there to be stronger wage growth. Last night there was a lot of support for minimum wages in states. That is something that we helped push in the administration. So certainly, as you say, we're coming from a position of strength. The last thing I would just mention on our economy, again, we will not say it's done, but we certainly made progress in strengthening our financial system in a way that other countries have not yet managed to do, and that can provide a good underpinning for private sector growth.
Great. How much time we have? 3 minutes? We'll take 2 more questions if it's okay.
Keep my answers shorter.
Okay. In the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Dong Huiyu with China Review News Agency. And my question is regarding the midterm election. Do you think President Obama still have the mandate or incentive to have a free trade and investment agenda with China, or he will be more tougher in economic policy toward China, like bargain with China for the currency issue or labor right or something like that? Thank you very much.
We take one more, and the gentleman, yes. Yes, he, yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Matt Schul. I'm from Inside U.S. Trade. So I just wanted to follow up, Ms. Atkinson, on your comments on the ITA Information Technology Agreement. In your discussions with Chinese officials when you were over there, do you have any indication, or through your other colleagues who are heading over there now, that China is willing to be flexible? I mean, the U.S. And you seem to be calling it's up to China to make a flexible offer. And so, do you have any indication that that could happen while the president is over in China? And do you expect President Obama to address that issue directly with the Chinese leader, Xi? Thank you.
Perhaps I could say, and it goes a little bit to what one of the other questioners were asking, we believe that we have been quite flexible and creative as we've been working to craft what is a complex agreement, because this is a plurilateral trade agreement. I'm talking about the ITA. It's not just a bilateral agreement with China. So, but it is now, China is such an important player in this market that the nature of China's offer will be extremely important for bringing this to conclusion. And, it's not over yet, is all I would say about timing. On the other question, look, spoke to the president this morning, and he is very determined to continue to do what he was elected to do, which is to promote, and he's going to be speaking soon, I think, to promote a strong American economy for the middle class and to work on an international agenda that is supportive of that. So again, I want to go back to, we need to be firm about where we have bilateral frictions in the economic sphere with other countries, but it is a positive-sum game, and United States policies sort of demonstrate that. We are an open economy, and this is something that we believe has helped to foster our growth and development and resilience to crisis. Thank you.
Well, just speaking for myself, I observe your team, really wonderful team, have solid understanding of the Chinese political economy, and really push very hard to advance the U.S. interests. At the same time, have a very solid understanding of China's interests and the Chinese domestic politics and Xi Jinping and his team's concern. Actually, their team is also not bad. I hope you agree with me. I think with these two teams, with two presidents, really want to leave some legacy. I hope that your President trip, will be a very, very successful one.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you. Thank you.